Jake Miller wiped the thick black grease from his hands using an old rag that had seen better days. The cloth was already stained from months of use, but out here on Station Omega 9, you didn't waste anything. He stepped carefully through the dark corridors of the abandoned Vraxian hauler, his boots clanging against the metal floor with each step. The air inside the dead ship was thick and heavy, filled with the smell of rotting organic matter and harsh chemicals that made his eyes water. This was Jake's fourth salvage run this week. The lower docks of the station were like a graveyard for ships. Massive vessels from dozens of alien species just sat there, abandoned and forgotten. Most alien crews found it cheaper to dump their old ships and buy new ones rather than pay the fees to break them down properly. For Jake, though, these ghost ships were gold mines. Hidden in their guts were parts and components he could fix up and sell. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills and kept him independent. He'd been working as a mechanic on the station for almost 3 years now. Most days were predictable. Wake up, fix some alien tech that nobody else wanted to deal with, grab a meal at the human section of the food court, then head back to his small workshop to work on his personal projects. Life was simple, maybe a bit lonely, but it was his. Jake moved deeper into the ship, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The Vraxian haulers were built differently than human ships. Everything was organic looking, with curved walls that seemed to breathe even when the power was dead. It always creeped him out a little, but the Vraxians paid top dollar for biocomponents, so he pushed through the discomfort. He was 3 decks down in what looked like a cargo area, when he heard something that made him freeze. It wasn't the usual sounds of a dead ship. Not the hissing of escaping gas or the groaning of metal settling. This was different. This was organic. This was alive. The sound came again. A weak chirping noise, almost like a bird, but with a desperate edge to it that made Jake's stomach twist. Something was hurt. Something was suffering. Jake followed the sound, moving carefully around puddles of unidentified liquid and piles of discarded cargo containers. The chirping grew louder, more urgent. It was coming from a bio-waste containment unit in the corner of the cargo bay. The unit was designed to hold organic refuse before it got ejected into space. Jake had seen these before. They weren't meant for anything living. His hands worked quickly on the manual release. The locking mechanism was stiff from disuse, and he had to put his full weight into it before it finally gave way with a harsh clang. The door swung open and the smell that hit him almost made him gag. It was the stench of infection, of disease, of slow death. But it was what he saw inside that made his breath catch in his throat. Curled up in the cramped space was a creature unlike anything Jake had seen before. It was small, maybe the size of a medium dog, with a body that was clearly reptilian. But he could barely make out its shape because almost every inch of it was covered in something else. Dark, crusty shells clustered so thick that they looked like armor. Thousands of them. Maybe millions. They moved slightly, pulsing as they fed on whatever was underneath. The creature's eyes opened slowly, as if even that small movement took enormous effort. They were pale blue, foggy with fever and pain, but there was something in them that hit Jake like a punch. Intelligence. Awareness. This wasn't some mindless animal. This was someone, not something. Jake's throat tightened. What the hell did they do to you? The words came out as a whisper. He pulled out his portable scanner, the same one he used to identify ship components. He pointed it at the creature, and the readings made his blood run cold. The shells were space barnacles, a parasitic species that attached to living hosts and slowly drained their bioenergy. The scanner's alert flashed red. Fatal if not removed. Time remaining, less than 2 weeks. The creature itself registered as something called a Dracmorian juvenile. Jake searched his memory. He'd seen that name before in some old historical database he'd browsed out of boredom. An ancient species. One that was supposed to be extinct. He looked from the suffering creature to the disposal chute mounted on the wall right next to the containment unit. The picture became clear. Someone had put this creature here on purpose. They'd infected it with these parasites and left it in a waste container waiting for it to die. Then they dumped the body into space like garbage. No evidence. No questions. The creature chirped again, softer this time. Its eyes stayed locked on Jake's face as if begging for something it had no right to expect. Mercy maybe. Or just a quick end to the suffering. Jake felt anger rising in his chest, hot and fierce. He'd seen a lot of cruel things in his years on the station. Aliens treating each other badly over credits and trade disputes. But this was different. This was deliberate torture of something helpless. Something young. He made his decision without really thinking about it. His hands moved carefully, sliding under the creature's body. It whimpered, a sound that made his heart clench, but he lifted it as gently as he could. The creature was surprisingly light, probably because the parasites had been feeding on it for so long. "Not today, little one," Jake said softly. "Not on my watch." He turned to leave and nearly walked straight into a Vraxian merchant who'd been watching from the doorway. The alien's compound eyes fixed on the creature in Jake's arms, and its mandibles clicked together rapidly in a sound Jake had learned meant disgust. "Contaminated organism," the Vraxian said in its translated voice. "Dispose properly, human. Do not bring infection to station." Jake met the alien's gaze and didn't blink. "Move." The Vraxian clicked again, probably about to argue, but something in Jake's expression made it step aside. Jake walked past, carrying the dying creature carefully against his chest, and headed toward his workshop. Behind him, he could hear the Vraxian speaking into a communicator, probably reporting him to someone. Jake didn't care. He had work to do. The creature lay motionless on Jake's workbench, her breathing so shallow that he had to watch carefully just to see her chest move. Jake had cleared away all his tools and projects to make space for her. He'd laid down clean cloths and set up a heating lamp because she felt cold to the touch. Something about those pale white scales, barely visible under all those parasites, reminded him of Earth's moon on a clear night. So he started calling her Luna. Jake hadn't slept much since bringing her back. Every few hours he'd check on her, give her water through a dropper, try to make her comfortable. But he knew comfort wasn't enough. Those barnacles were killing her and he was running out of time. For 2 days straight, Jake called every medical facility on Station Omega 9. He started with the general clinics, then moved to the specialty centers, then finally to the private practices that catered to wealthy aliens. The answer was always the same, just delivered in different ways. Some were polite about it. Others were cold. But the message never changed. The Helix Collective's chief physician didn't sugarcoat it. The alien doctor appeared on Jake's screen with an expression that might have been sympathy, though it was hard to tell with its species. "The barnacles have integrated with the host's nervous system," the doctor explained, its voice flat and clinical. "They've been attached too long. Removal at this stage means death. The shock to the system would be fatal within minutes. Euthanasia is the merciful option here." Jake felt his jaw tighten. There has to be another way. Some procedure, some technique you haven't tried. "There isn't," the doctor said firmly. "I'm sorry, but this is beyond medical intervention. Please dispose of it properly before the infection spreads to other organisms. These parasites can transfer to new hosts if given the opportunity." The call ended with a soft beep, leaving Jake staring at a blank screen. He turned slowly to look at Luna. She was watching him again with those pale blue eyes. Even in her weakened state, she tracked his movements. There was awareness there, understanding. She chirped softly, a weak sound that somehow managed to break something deep in Jake's chest. He walked over and gently placed his hand near her head, not quite touching. "They want me to give up on you," he said quietly. "Every single one of them thinks you're already dead. Just a matter of time." He paused, feeling frustration and determination mixing together in his gut. "But I'm human. And humans are really, really bad at giving up. It's kind of our thing." Luna made another soft sound, and Jake could have sworn she understood him. That's when Jake stopped trying to think like someone asking for help. He started thinking like what he was. A mechanic who solved impossible problems every single day. Aliens brought him tech that was broken beyond repair and he fixed it. They brought him systems that no longer had replacement parts and he made new ones. Why should this be different? He began with research. 72 hours without sleep, fueled by coffee and sheer stubbornness. His workshop became a study center. Screens covered every wall, each displaying different information. Barnacle biology on one screen. Dracmorian physiology on another. Nervous system integration on a third. He hacked into medical databases he probably shouldn't have accessed, downloaded research papers in languages he had to run through translation software, watched surgery videos until his eyes burned. The aliens were right about one thing. Traditional removal was impossible. If you tried to pull the barnacles off, their roots were so deep in the nervous system that you'd cause catastrophic damage. It would be like ripping out someone's spine. But Jake wasn't thinking about traditional removal. He was thinking about precision extraction. The kind of delicate, millimeter-by-millimeter work he did when repairing microcircuits in alien ship computers. His hands were steady. Years of working with tiny components had given him that. Maybe, just maybe, he could do this. He started with a single barnacle. Just one. A test run to see if his theory held any water. Jake set up his microplasma cutter, the same tool he used for precision welding on delicate ship parts. He calibrated it to the lowest possible setting so low it would barely cut through organic tissue. Then he set up monitors to track Luna's vital signs, ready to stop at the first sign of trouble. "Okay, Luna," he said softly, positioning his tools. "This is probably going to hurt. I'm sorry. But I need you to trust me." He began cutting. The barnacle had roots that went deep, little tendrils that had woven themselves into Luna's flesh like parasitic threads. Jake worked slowly, so slowly that removing one barnacle took almost an hour. His hands never shook. His focus never wavered. He cut and cauterized, each movement deliberate and careful. Then Luna screamed. It was a high-pitched sound, sharp and full of agony, and it cut through Jake like a knife. Tears blurred his vision, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He sealed the wound with synthetic skin gel, the same stuff used for emergency medical treatment on humans. The monitors beeped frantically as Luna's heart rate spiked. Jake held his breath, watching the screens. Luna's vitals bounced around dangerously for 30 seconds that felt like 30 years. Then slowly, gradually, they started to stabilize. Her breathing steadied. The wound began to close under the gel. She'd survived. Jake let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He looked at Luna, then at the millions of barnacles still covering her body. The enormity of what he'd just committed to hit him like a wave. "One down," he said quietly, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and emotion. He managed a small, tired smile. "Only a few million to go. We can do this, girl. One at a time." Luna chirped once, soft but clear, and Jake chose to believe it meant she trusted him. He picked up his tools and got back to work. Word spread through Station Omega-9 like wildfire. The human mechanic in Bay 17 was trying to save some dying alien creature. People talked about it in the cafeterias, in the cargo bays, in the hallways between shifts. Most of the alien species found it amusing in a pathetic sort of way. Humans were still new to the galactic community, still naive about how things worked. This Jake Miller character was wasting time and resources on something that was already dead. Some species found it disturbing. Why would anyone care so much about a worthless organism? It didn't make economic sense. It didn't follow any logical protocol they understood. But Jake didn't care what anyone thought. By day 7 he'd been working almost non-stop. His eyes were red from lack of sleep. His hands ached from the precise, delicate work. He'd removed maybe 1,000 barnacles so far. When he let himself think about the several million that still remained, covering Luna's body like a living crust, the task felt impossible. So he didn't think about it. He just focused on the next one, then the next one, then the next one after that. Luna was stronger now. Not by much, but enough that Jake could see the difference. She could lift her head for longer periods. Her breathing was steadier. And those pale blue eyes followed him everywhere with an intensity that kept him going when exhaustion threatened to drag him down. That's when they came. Jake was hunched over Luna, his microplasma cutter in hand, when his workshop door slid open without warning. 3 Vraxians stepped inside, their exoskeletons gleaming under the harsh workshop lights. They wore official insignia on their carapaces, the symbol of the Biotrade Consortium. Jake recognized it immediately. These weren't just random aliens. These were the ones who dumped Luna in the first place. The leader stepped forward, its mandibles clicking in what Jake had learned was their version of authority. "This organism is contaminated waste from our vessel," it stated, its translated voice cold and mechanical. "You are interfering with proper disposal protocols." Jake didn't look up from his work. His hands stayed steady as he carefully removed another barnacle, sealed the wound, monitored Luna's vitals. "She's not waste," he said quietly. "She's alive." "It is defective," the Vraxian continued. "Albinism renders it valueless for our purposes. You must cease this wasteful endeavor immediately." Something in Jake snapped. Maybe it was the lack of sleep. Maybe it was the casual way they called Luna, it, and defective. Maybe it was the fact that these creatures had deliberately infected a child with parasites and thrown her away like garbage. He slowly put down his tools, stood up, and turned to face them. His hands were shaking, but not from exhaustion anymore. "Get out of my workshop." The Vraxian leader's compound eyes focused on him. "You are violating multiple station regulations. You are harboring biohazardous material. You are interfering with corporate property disposal. You must." "I said get out." Jake's shout echoed through the workshop. Luna made a distressed chirp behind him. The Vraxians backed up a step, surprised by the human's aggression. One of them immediately activated a communicator, calling for station security. Within minutes, the situation escalated. 2 security officers arrived, one human and one from the Centauri Collective. The Vraxians began loudly explaining their case, citing regulations and protocols, demanding that the contaminated organism be returned to them for proper disposal. They talked about health hazards and legal violations and corporate rights. Jake stood in his doorway, arms crossed, ready to physically fight if he had to. He wasn't a big guy. He wasn't a soldier. But he wasn't going to let them take Luna. That's when something unexpected happened. Beth Rodriguez appeared at the end of the corridor. She was a cargo hauler, built strong from years of manual labor. Jake had fixed her ship's loading system a few months back. She'd heard the commotion. She walked up, assessed the situation in about 5 seconds, and then simply stepped between the Vraxians and Jake's door. "What's going on here?" she asked. Before anyone could answer, Tom Brennan showed up. He was an engineer who worked in the upper decks. Then came Lisa Hayes from the hydroponics bay, still wearing her work gloves covered in soil. Then Danny Wu, a shuttle pilot. Then others. Humans Jake had worked with, humans he'd helped, humans he'd barely spoken to. Within an hour, a dozen humans had formed a protective wall around Jake's workshop. They didn't coordinate it. They didn't plan it. They just showed up, one after another, and stood together. Beth turned to the security chief, her voice calm but firm. "Whatever Jake's doing in there, he's not stopping. And we're not moving. So if you want to get to him, you'll have to go through us." The security chief looked overwhelmed. The Vraxians were clicking their mandibles furiously, already pulling up communication devices to file complaints with the Galactic Council. This was becoming an interstellar incident. The Vraxians eventually retreated, promising legal action and sanctions. But they left. The story exploded across the station's news feeds within hours. Images of Luna, covered in barnacles, appeared on screens across 1,000 worlds. Videos of the stubborn human mechanic working day and night to save her. Pictures of humans standing together, protecting one of their own. The galaxy watched with fascination and confusion. This wasn't how civilized species behaved. This wasn't logical. Inside the workshop, after the crowd had dispersed and things had quieted down, Jake sat back down at his workbench. His hands were shaking from the adrenaline. Luna was watching him with those intelligent eyes. Then he heard something that wasn't a sound. It was inside his head. Words forming, fragmented and weak, but unmistakably real. "Thank you." Jake froze. He stared at Luna and she stared back. Her eyes were clearer now, more focused. "Did you just?" he whispered. "Thank you, Jake." A smile spread across Jake's exhausted face and tears filled his eyes. "You're talking. Hey, we're getting somewhere, Luna. We're really getting somewhere." He picked up his tools and got back to work. They had a long way to go, but for the first time, Jake felt like they might actually make it. 3 weeks had passed since Jake first found Luna in that waste container. 3 weeks of endless work, of careful precision, of removing barnacles one by one until his hands cramped and his vision blurred. But finally, on a quiet morning in his workshop, Jake used his microplasma cutter to remove the very last barnacle from Luna's tail. The moment was almost anticlimactic. One final cut, one final application of synthetic gel, and it was done. Jake sat back in his chair, exhausted beyond words, and just stared at what he'd accomplished. Luna had changed dramatically during the process. She'd grown from the size of a small dog to something closer to a large wolf. Her body had filled out, muscles developing where before there had only been skin and bone. But it was her scales that took Jake's breath away. With all the barnacles gone, they gleamed like polished pearl in the workshop lights. Each scale caught the light differently, creating a shimmer effect that was almost hypnotic. Her pale blue eyes, once glazed with fever and pain, now held a depth that seemed impossibly ancient, as if she'd lived 1,000 lifetimes. The telepathic connection between them had grown stronger with each passing day. At first, it had been just fragments, broken words and emotions that Jake could barely understand. But now Luna's voice in his mind was crystal clear, carrying layers of meaning that spoken words never could. He felt her grief and her gratitude in equal measure, emotions so powerful they sometimes brought tears to his eyes. "Jake Miller," Luna's voice resonated in his thoughts, formal and serious. "You have saved more than one life. You have awakened a memory the galaxy tried to erase." Jake frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" "I saved you, Luna. Just you." "No," she replied. "Let me show you." What happened next was something Jake would never forget. Luna opened her mind to him completely, and suddenly he wasn't in his workshop anymore. He was seeing through her memories, experiencing her history as if it were his own. The Vraxians had been stealing Drakmorian eggs for decades. Luna showed him dark facilities where eggs were harvested and cracked open, The embryos inside processed into bioenhancement serums that sold for fortunes on black markets across the galaxy. The serums promised longer life, enhanced abilities, perfect health. And they worked. But each dose required the death of a Dracmorian child. Luna's egg had been in one of those facilities. But when she hatched, the Vraxians discovered her albinism immediately. Her scales were white instead of the typical colors they needed for their serums. White scales meant different biology, different chemistry. She was worthless to them. But they couldn't just release her. She was evidence of their crimes. So they'd made a choice that was somehow more cruel than just killing her outright. They infected her with space barnacles, creatures that would slowly drain her life while destroying any useful biological material. Then they dumped her in a waste container on an abandoned ship, expecting her to die alone and forgotten. The barnacles would consume her completely, leaving nothing but shells. No evidence. No witness. Jake felt sick as he experienced these memories. But Luna wasn't finished. She showed him something else, something that went back much further. Suddenly Jake was seeing ancient Earth, thousands of years before recorded history. Dracmorians had visited his world back then, before humans had built cities or developed writing. They'd observed the primitive humans with curiosity. Most spacefaring species at that stage of development were violent, territorial, focused only on survival. But humans were different. Luna showed him memory after memory, passed down through Dracmorian genetics. A human child sharing food with an injured animal. A group of humans carrying an elderly member who could no longer walk, refusing to leave them behind. Humans helping each other through harsh winters, through droughts, through disasters, not because it was profitable but because it was right. The Dracmorians had been amazed. Here was a species that valued compassion over efficiency, that chose kindness even when it cost them dearly. They were stubborn and optimistic in ways that seemed almost irrational. They cared about things they gained nothing from caring about. My kind made a pact with yours, Luna explained, her mental voice filled with emotion. We would sleep, hidden away until humanity reached the stars. Because we knew that when you finally came to the galaxy, you would bring something it had lost. Only humans remember how to care. Jake felt tears running down his face. But your species almost got wiped out waiting for us. Almost, Luna agreed. But you found me. You saved me. And now we can save the others. The revelation went public within days. Luna insisted on it despite Jake's concerns for her safety. She addressed the Galactic Council directly, with Jake standing beside her in a chamber filled with representatives from hundreds of worlds. Her telepathic voice reached every mind in the room as she shared her memories, showed them the truth of what had been done. The Vraxian Biotrade Consortium collapsed overnight. Criminal charges were filed. Investigations were launched across dozens of star systems. And most importantly, Luna's genetic memories led rescue teams to other hidden Dracmorians. 37 were found alive, most in similar conditions to what Luna had endured. Some were already being harvested. Some were days from death. But here's what amazed the galaxy most. Humans led every single rescue operation. Not because they had the best technology, they didn't. Not because they were the strongest species, they weren't. But because they approached each rescue the way Jake had approached Luna. With patience. With compassion. With the stubborn refusal to give up on a life just because saving it was difficult. Human rescue teams taught alien crews their methods. They showed them how to care for traumatized beings, how to take time with the healing process, how to value life over efficiency. It wasn't about forcing their ways on others. It was about demonstrating something the galaxy had forgotten was possible. Jake watched it all from Station Omega 9, still working in his small workshop, still fixing broken things. But now when he looked at Luna, strong and healthy and free, he understood something profound. Sometimes saving one life changes everything. And humanity had just reminded the galaxy what that meant. 6 months had passed since Jake removed that last barnacle from Luna's tail. 6 months that had changed both of their lives in ways neither could have imagined. Luna had grown beyond anything Jake had expected. She was now the size of a small cargo ship, her body sleek and powerful. Her wings had developed fully, massive and elegant, with membranes that shimmered like oil on water. She could fly now, not just in atmosphere but through space itself, moving between stars without needing a ship. But no matter how far she traveled, no matter what distant corners of the galaxy she explored, Luna always came back to Station Omega 9. Always back to the small workshop in Bay 17 where a stubborn mechanic had refused to let her die. Today was special. Jake stood in his best clothes, which honestly weren't much better than his work clothes, next to Luna in the central plaza of the station. Thousands had gathered for the dedication ceremony. The station had built a Drakmorian sanctuary in one of the massive docking bays, a place designed specifically for Luna's species to live and recover. The funding had come from dozens of alien species, many of whom had initially called Jake's efforts wasteful and foolish. Now they competed to show their support. The sanctuary was beautiful. Artificial habitats recreated environments from the Drakmorian homeworld, long abandoned. There were crystalline caves that caught and reflected light in patterns that the Drakmorians found comforting. There were warm pools fed by thermal systems. There were open spaces where they could fly and play. And there were medical facilities, staffed by teams that Jake himself had trained in the careful, patient methods he'd developed while saving Luna. Jake watched young Drakmorians play in those habitats now. 37 had been rescued using Luna's genetic memories. Some were still recovering, but others were healthy and strong, their scales shining in colors Jake had never seen before. Emerald green, deep crimson, sapphire blue. Luna's white scales made her unique among them, but she was no longer alone. "You changed everything," Jake said quietly, his voice almost lost in the noise of the crowd. But he knew Luna could hear him. Their mental connection didn't require sound. "No," Luna replied, her mental voice carrying warmth and affection that made Jake's chest tight. "You did. One human choosing kindness over convenience. That's what changed everything." Jake shook his head. "I just did what anyone would do." "That's where you're wrong," Luna said. Her massive head lowered until her snout gently touched Jake's forehead. The connection between them deepened, and Jake felt the weight of everything Luna wanted to share. The galaxy has built itself on power and profit for thousands of years. Species measure each other by military strength, by economic output, by technological advancement. Your species offers something else. Something most races forgot was valuable. You offer hope. Through their bond, Luna showed Jake what had changed across the galaxy. Former rivals were cooperating on rescue missions. Species that had been enemies for generations were working together to find and save other endangered beings. Long-standing prejudices were being questioned. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't universal, but something fundamental had shifted. And it had started with one mechanic in a workshop, refusing to walk away from suffering. The ceremony continued around them. Dignitaries gave speeches that Jake mostly tuned out. They talked about cooperation and new eras and bridges between species. It all sounded nice, but Jake knew the real work was happening in quieter places. In workshops and medical bays. In small moments where someone chose to help instead of looking away. After the speeches ended, Luna prepared to leave. She was joining a new exploration fleet, a joint human-Drakmorian venture that would travel to unexplored regions of space. They'd search for more lost Drakmorians, for other species that might need help, for new worlds and new possibilities. Her wings unfurled, each one larger than Jake's entire workshop. The crowd stepped back, giving her space. But before she took off, Luna's voice filled Jake's mind one last time. "The stars belong to those who care for them," she said. "Humanity will inherit what the old races have forgotten. Not through conquest or superior weapons or clever trade deals. Through compassion. Through the stubborn refusal to let things die when they can be saved. That is your strength. That is why we waited for you." Jake felt tears in his eyes. "I'm going to miss you, Luna." "I'll be back," she promised. "Always. This is home." Then she launched herself into the air, her wings creating a wind that rustled clothes and sent loose papers flying. Jake watched her soar through the open docking bay doors and out into the black of space, her white scales catching the light of distant stars until she was just a bright point in the darkness. Jake stood there long after she'd vanished from sight. Around him, the crowd dispersed, returning to their lives and duties. But Jake felt something had permanently shifted, not just in the galaxy but in himself. He'd been a mechanic trying to save one dying creature. Nothing more complicated than that. He hadn't been trying to change the world or make some grand statement about humanity. He'd just seen suffering and decided he couldn't ignore it. But somehow, that simple choice had reminded an entire galaxy of something it had lost. Something essential. Other species watched humanity now with newfound respect. Some watched with fear, uncertain of what these compassionate, stubborn newcomers might do next. But all of them understood one fundamental truth about humans now. They didn't measure worth in credits or power or technological advancement. They measured it in lives saved, in beings helped, in suffering prevented, in the simple question of whether someone needed help and whether they could provide it. Jake turned and walked back toward his workshop. He had work to do. Ships to fix. Problems to solve. Maybe more lives to save. And that made all the difference in the universe.